Walla Walla sits in the southeast part of Washington state. You have to mean to go there to get there. Luckily, the easiest route is through the spectacular Columbia River Gorge. We ended our last episode with a bit of this Zen beauty. Seems appropriate to kick off this episode with a bit also. I mean, we could all use a little more nature and Zen in our lives. Leaving the Portland area, you drive through the green portion of the gorge. Gradually, the landscape changes to high desert as you head further east and cross the Columbia River Gorge into Washington. This part of Washington was once mostly wheat, rolling hills of waving grain that seemed to extend forever. Now, it is dotted with the green of vineyards. Walla Walla translates to water or many waters. The valley is filled with tributaries, although this is a dry climate. This is a place where Bordeaux varieties thrive and can compete on a world stage. While the city of Walla Walla sits firmly in Washington, the Walla Walla AVA straddles the border between Washington and Oregon. In fact, many of the vineyards sit on the Oregon side of the state line. Our next two episodes will be on the Walla Walla area, but we will also focus on wine with food. Our stop on the Scenic route journey took us to Caprio Cellars. Caprio sits just south of the city of Walla Walla, but is indeed on the Washington side of the state line. Caprio Cellars tasting room and hospitality feature pairing local foods with their wines to create a wine experience for their guests. The property that is now Caprio Cellars was once covered in wheat. In 2003, Dennis Murphy bought this former wheat field and began his dream of starting a vineyard. This vineyard is named for his grandmother, Eleanor, and the winery is named Caprio, her last name and the name of generations of his Italian family. His grandmother grew grapes for wine in her yard. She was the first of their family to immigrate to the United States. Her nickname was Grandmother Grapes. Caprio Cellars is all about hospitality. While many wineries pivoted to private tastings and social distancing in tasting rooms over the pandemic, this model has always been the Caprio method. They intend for each guest to arrive and be given the VIP treatment. You are greeted with sparkling wine as you arrive and are allowed to roam the property, finding the perfect seating area for you or your group. There are seating areas around the patio with views of the Blue Mountains, as well as conversation areas inside. All allow you to get comfortable and encourage conversation. This is not a belly up to the bar kind of place. In addition to the seating, the hospitality continues with small courses to accompany the wines. Made by their on-staff chef, these feature local products and are complimentary. Dennis Murphy, the owner and winemaker, explains why he decided to set up his tastings this way.
And I'm big into disruption. Like I sat in my friends' tasting rooms for hours. And they're like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm just watching people." And so just by design, the tasting room's 2 to 3 to 4 times bigger than most tasting rooms. And people want to be in their little cliques. They don't want to share a table. Like they don't want to sit down with us. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's just whatever it is. I just kept recognizing that. So we have always been by appointment only. And my friends were really critical of that because they're like, you got to take as many people as come. And I go, here's the deal. We're going to do 20 people per group. So 20 people per time slot, and it's 4 times a day. And we're going to do them in 90-minute increments. It was very, very, pragmatic and engineer-like. And we're going to do appointment only. But they're like, you have to have 200 or 300 people through your room or you're not going to sell as much wine. And I said, here's the deal. I would rather sell 80 people wine and have them leaving, totally stoked than sell 200 people wine and have them leaving, I didn't get the Syrah because they were too busy, or I didn't get the Cab because it was this or whatever. And then the other thing that, just kept bothering me is I would see, like, the owners and winemakers didn't see this, but I would see the people in the corner. And so there's 4 people in a group, let's say, and they each pay $20 to taste, and they're in the corner, and so they're having a good time, and then all of a sudden it becomes time to decide how they're going to get out of there alive. And they're like, we're in this $80. What are we going to do? You don't like the rosé. You don't like the Syrah. What are we going to buy to get out of here alive? And it's agonizing.
Yeah.
And it takes this beautiful experience to kind of this point where it's like awkward. And so I said, you know what? We're not going to charge for tastings. We're going to avoid that whole little awkward thing. And we're going to, it's a philosophy, the equity theory I learned in business school. It's like, we're just going to have people in. And we're going to ask them if they enjoyed themselves, buy a couple extra bottles of wine. And it's been very successful. People are like, finally, nobody's nickel and diming me. I'm going to buy 6 more bottles of wine.
Yeah.
And by the way, they fed me. Not only they fed me, they got one of the best chefs in town. And the offering is not like a charcuterie plate. It's like whatever he's making, whatever's fresh coming from the farm. And so it's been, I would say that our tasting room sales are 2x of what I know around the valley. And it's because people come here and have such a great experience, they want to be part of it. And they want to take the wine home. And it's also risky, but here's the deal. If it didn't work, what would I have to do? Charge a tasting fee. So we haven't had to do that yet.
Right.
So it took a little bit to get out on the skinny branches, and people thought I was crazy, but it's been, we have 393 5-star reviews on Google, which is, 275 more than the next winery.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's working. Well, and because we're by reservation only or appointment only, and we have the gate, the thing that was always mixed emotions at my friends' wineries was when the bus came.
Yeah.
And so the owner's like, oh, we're going to sell some wine. And the staff's like, we're already overwhelmed. Like, we're totally we're going to be swamped.
Exactly.
And then that level of service goes down.
Yeah.
And so because we only have 20 people every 90 minutes.
Right.
And the facility's built for that. We have seating for 60 inside and another 40 or 50 outside. So, we're never packed. Some people stay, and we're not kicking you out. So you're allowed to stay as long.
Right.
And so some people will overlap to the next group. We have plenty of room. We could have 40 people here.
So we have a wonderful burrata over stone fruit with fresh tomatoes from the season. Drizzles it with beautiful olive oil from D'Olivo downtown. We also have kind of a classic bruschetta with the first tomatoes of the season. He devils in there a little Castelvetrano olives and capers, just adding this nice briny characteristic to it. Grilled ciabatta, and then we have catetes, which is a classic Greek meatball with pork and lamb. We do pickled Walla Walla sweet onions on top with a traditional tzatziki, and then fresh feta as well.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
we'll kind of course that out and pair it along for you.
Brilliant. Sounds delicious.
So, food and wine. Here at Caprio, it seems so easy. But you're in a restaurant with friends or having a dinner party, choosing a wine can be stressful. There are old adages about white wine with fish and red wine with red meat, and those hold true. But there are exceptions to play with. Here are some of the basics. Let's start with that theory on color. There is sense in this. White wines tend to be lighter and more aromatic, with citrus and floral notes. These delicate aromas and flavors would be overpowered by a big steak. But with a delicate fish, the wine has room to sing, and the fish is not overpowered by the wine. Red wines, on the other hand, would overpower the fish, whereas with a steak, they can hold their own. Color in this case is an indicator of the weight and power of the wine. To get a little geekier, you remember I mentioned in a previous episode that most of wine's intense flavors come from the skins? Red wines macerate on their skins to pull out that intense flavor, making them darker and fuller in body. White wines rarely rest on their skins, so they have less of these notes. One more old rule that you can break, of course, with color. Pink with pink. Rosé wines love to pair with foods that are pink. Think shrimp, ham, salmon, lobster. All of these are great with a light rosé. Of course, this doesn't mean that you should always follow these rules. Rules are meant to be broken. But This gives you a few easy-to-remember guidelines that will do in a pinch. Another great tip for pairing is, what grows together goes together. We find this especially in Old World wines, where the wine developed in a small village or region, and of course was paired with the foods that they grow there. In the south of France, Picpoul de Pinet is a white wine grown on the Mediterranean coast. It is brilliant with oysters, which you find in beds right off the coast. In Italy, Sangiovese or Chianti with Italian pasta. In the Willamette Valley, Pinot Noir with salmon. See, here we broke that color rule. At Caprio Cellars, they are pairing local ingredients, fresh from local farms with their local wines. Chef Ian finds what is fresh that day and uses that as his inspiration for pairing, then thoughtfully matches these ingredients with Caprio wines. The plates are delicious, pairing beautifully with the wines. They are also elegant and beautiful, again, making you feel like a VIP in this beautiful tasting room. While hospitality is at the forefront here, let's not forget about the wines. Dennis fell in love with wine, then discovered Walla Walla through a bottle of wine from Le Col number 41.
I found myself driving back and forth between Tri-Cities and here for my main job of construction, and I thought, who in the world is making wine out in eastern Washington? And then I went to Seattle, and Lake Cole was on the wine list, and I asked the waiter, I said, is this stuff any good? And he goes, this stuff will blow your mind. And so I ordered a bottle of Lake Cole Merlot, and it blew my mind. And so I started stopping at Woodward Canyon, Lake Cole, and seeing what they had to offer, and it was pretty special. You know, I was very Napa-centric at that point. And so in 1999, I moved here from Spokane to do this, and it's just been a progression of buying this property in 2003, and then planting our Eleanor Vineyard in 2005, making our first wine in 2008. And so that was kind of the impetus of getting here in the early days. So
Gotcha. Now I know that you learned a lot about winemaking through some of the other great winemakers in the area. Were you just kind of helping out, or did you do anything with Caprio Cellars before you had the estate?
No, Caprio Cellars became real in 2008 when we had our first vintage.
Gotcha.
From 2000 to 2008, I would just do my best to tag along with whoever was available.
Great.
To walk through the vineyards and work at Crush, and fortunately back then people were open and happy to have you, and so I got to rub elbows with all the kind of hot shots now. But the cool thing is, they taught me how to make wine, or I guess I taught by being around them. I learned it, and then during the my day job's construction, and so during the recession I had a little extra time, so I went down to UC Davis, took some classes, and it just affirmed that pretty much everything that they taught me was spot on. So so that was kind of fun to see. So yeah.
So I heard you have your barrel storage here.
Correct.
But you make your wine in another facility right now?
I do. I've always made my wine at a place called Artifacts, which is a custom crush.
Yes.
And I like making wine there because I don't have to have my own facility.
Right.
But you're also there with about 10 other people kind of making wine and figuring things out. And so it's kind of there's some camaraderie. Yeah, the custom crush places are awesome because they provide for, a startup like me, a place where you can have really nice equipment, great lab, and it's because it's the group of you are all pitching in to make sure everything's real top notch. So,
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Tell me about the story of the name of Caprio and the name with your wines.
So Eleanor Caprio was my grandmother, and Sanatella Caprio, which is our premium wine, was my great grandmother. And when I went to search for names, it was always the name that I wanted, but there were a few other names that just kind of played around with, but it's hard to get stuff trademarked, and so so that was a rude awakening that I was all of a sudden like, okay, well, a couple of these didn't work, so I applied for Caprio and it was not used, so I was able to trademark it, and the rest is history. The kind of the cool thing about this facility here, our tasting room, is that we're the only winery that provides food pairings for all of our tastings in the valley here in Walla Walla. And the story that I'll tell you is that my grandmother Eleanor was a wonderful Italian lady who was an excellent chef, and she'd be really upset if I had you over to drink wine and didn't offer you something to eat. And so it was non-negotiable to have a chef in the kitchen, and we figured out how to do it, and it's been very well received.
You were also able to keep your entire staff on during all of this past year when things were so tough, and I think that's so important. It builds such loyalty. I mean, it is a small group of people, and it becomes almost family, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, it was my goal on both of my lives to not lay anyone off. I felt that the COVID pandemic would be temporary, and I felt that if every employer could hold on to their employees one way or another, we would avoid this mass unemployment. And so I just took it as a personal mission to do that. And so we kept the whole team here, and the team was awesome. They were like, what are we going to do? You know, we're not working, we're shut down. And Chef Ian and Amy or Emily were like, let's do to-go meals. And so we started doing Friday night to-go meals. And it was really interesting because we sold out every Friday night, and the people who came were a lot of our wine club members. They just want to see a human. So they would buzz through the gate, come up, we'd come out with masks and gloves on, and they'd open, their trunk or their back door, and we'd put their to-go meal in, and they'd always order a couple extra bottles, and they were just happy to see a smiling face. And those were kind of weird days, when we were all kind of stay-at-home order. And so it was safe and it worked, and we kept the brand relevant, which a lot of wineries couldn't do because they didn't have a food program. And it was just nice to see the staff working together to make that happen.
It's terrific.
And then we did for the local Blue Mountain Action Council here, which is a real strong nonprofit. Team wanted to do a lunch. They have a food bank, and we did 200 bag lunches one week. And it was super well received, and the team felt really good about that.
That's great.
The estate vineyards of Caprio span both sides of that Oregon-Washington state line. The original vineyard is the Eleanor, named for his grandmother, that is planted on the property next to the tasting room. In addition, they have the Octave Vineyard and the Sanatella Vineyard, named for his great-grandmother, both of which sit on the Oregon side of the state line. We spoke a bit about the soils in these vineyards and how they influence the wines.
Yeah, so we're sitting here on the side of the Eleanor Vineyard, which is Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, and we're close to the Pepper Bridge Vineyard, and so I figured, didn't know much about grape growing, but knew real estate, and I knew about location, so I figured if I was close to another vineyard, I could predict some success. And so this vineyard's been great for those two varietals, but a year later, I got invited to be a partner in Octave, which is 5 other partners there now. It started with 8, and we've had two transition out. But some of the most powerful people in the valley here, and I was a little confused why I was invited to be in there because I was so new. It was 2006, and I do have a habit of collecting wine, and so I would share that wine with people, older vintages of Bordeaux and Napa. And Norm McKibben, who's a dear friend and mentor, now business partner of mine, invited me to be part of this Octave group, this 8 group. And there's master sommeliers and all these real, fancy people in there. And I said, well, Norm, I got a question for you. Like, why do you want me in there? He goes, well, you're starting a winery, and you kind of bring the retail collector side of it to us. And I said, okay. And so it's been a fun journey with that group. And probably the best result from the vineyard standpoint is it's a higher elevation vineyard, so it doesn't have as much frost problems. And so this valley floor can get a little cold, and it's a higher elevation, so it doesn't get as cold. And it does real well with the Cabernet Franc and the Malbec, which I love those 2 grapes that come out of this valley. And so that Octave vineyard has Cabernet Franc, Malbec, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot. And so that's, when you taste our reds, a lot of the backbone comes from there. So I fell in love with that vineyard. And once again, Norm McKibben, which will be this thread throughout the valley. He's pretty much involved in anything that's happening around here or knows about it. I said, hey, Norm, if you ever have any more land up there, which I knew he had hundreds of acres, I said, I'd like it particularly to be next to Octave, because I like the Cabernet profile coming out of there. And I like the soils that are there, which will bring out the soil differences. We have some soil samples that we share with our guests, and you'll see the difference. And, being a civil engineer by education, I understood geology pretty well, and I understood what was going on there with the fractured basalt and how it affects the minerality of the grapes. And so he offered me 40 acres next door to Octave. And it took me about 2.5 seconds to say yes. Didn't know how I was going to pay for it, but I said, I'm going to figure this out. And so over the last 6 years, I've planted that it's 40 acres, but it's got a big canyon in the middle of it, which is not plantable. So I've planted about 20 acres of it. And we'll taste the Sanatella later, and it's stunning. I mean, those grapes, those vineyards are absolutely stunning and beautiful up there. So,
with the soils being a lot of fractured basalt up there, and I'm assuming that you don't have as much here, right? So that gives you a lot more blending ability too. Yeah. It's a whole nother contrast.
Yeah.
In there.
So the soils here, when we dug the barrel room, we went down about 40 feet, and you could dig probably another 40 feet, and you're just going to hit what's called glacial loess. And the glacial loess is a really kind of fine, powdery soil that was the result of the big Missoula floods. And so this region would flood and then drain and flood and drain. And so this valley is kind of the side of that river. When you look at a river and you look at the side that gets the wash side, not the current, those deposits, just the sediment deposits, build up. This whole valley is basically one of those big river banks. And so you could dig, in some cases hundreds of feet deep, and you're not going to see any rocks. And if you do see a rock, you'll see what's called an erratic. And it's a piece of granite that made its way down from Montana, suspended in an iceberg. And so we actually found one when we dig here. We got it down at the house. But it's a pretty amazing geological site that we have here.
So, but Bordeaux style blends, that's your jam. That's your focus?
Yeah.
They do so well up here too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I started off making my Eleanor, which is my white label, which has always been Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cab Franc, Malbec, and I made that one wine for 6 vintages, and just focused, kept it simple, and a lot of the barrels that I had at that time, the vineyards were young, and I just would sell the wine by the gallon to other people that you've heard of, and they would gladly take it because it was all estate fruit and all French oak. Right. But I was looking for a certain profile, and in 2014 is when I kept it all and started making made the first Sanatella in 13, and then 14 made a red table wine, and these 3 wines. Since then, I've recently done a rosé and a white, but those 3 red wines were our core for about a decade, and it was pretty fun to just focus on that.
Yeah. Your white wine then. Tell me about that, because if it's a white wine that you're selling, then it's estate fruit from one of your vineyards.
So it comes from the Sanatella. It's Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, and we make about 150 cases, and it sells out in about 2.5 days. When you have an experience like we have here at the tasting room, you want to have a breadth of wines to share. And so we now have a white Bordeaux that we can share with you, just kind of as a placeholder until we make more white.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And I like that. I like the Sauvignon Blanc style of wines. I like that little more. One of the things is I refuse to make wines that I don't like. That I make wines that I want to drink. Which is a little selfish, but there's a lot of people of a profile, but a lot of people play to the market, and I kind of dig that crisp Sauvignon Blanc. I don't like Chardonnay, so never make Chardonnay. I shouldn't say never, but I'm not going to make. I doubt I'd ever make Chardonnay. But my rosé, which we'll try, is super light. It's not sweet. It's not pink. It's very slight pale. I don't like those. A lot of people are just buying it for the color or the taste or the sugar. Very south of France will hold up to a nice piece of fish or something like that. Great food wine, and I love it. I mean, that's just. Can't wait to have a glass of it.
Excellent. Tell me about your oak program, since we just mentioned.
Yeah, so I've been very particular about the oak, and so we blind taste. I bring in anybody who is willing to do it. Our barrel program every year, and we use about 6 different coopers. It's all French oak, and pretty much medium toast. And I'm not a big fan of like what a lot of people call oak juice. Where I think some of these wines are over oaked and over extracted, and so my wines are going to be just a little more pure and let the varietals speak for themselves. I only use about 30 to 40% new oak, and we only use the barrels twice.
We went through the aging process there, but with your crush, where you at? Are you whole cluster crush, or do you destem with things? All the reds are destemmed and just berries. Gotcha.
I don't do any whole cluster except for on the rosé. It's a rosé of Cap Franc. I'll do a little bit of whole cluster, a little bit of just berries, but it's such a fragile and just finesse process.
Right.
But it's also not a lot. It's 100 to 150 cases of rosé.
Right. And I'm assuming from the style that you were talking about, it's all direct press. Yeah. A gentle direct press.
Yeah.
Walla Walla is a great town. The pace here is slower and the drivers are polite. In the downtown area, there are tasting rooms along 2nd Avenue and just off Main. Plan to stroll, taking in the shops, parks, and tasting rooms, but leave room for something delicious to eat. We recommend AK Mercado with Chef Andre Bopp. There are lots of great places to stay, but we'll recommend 2. The Marcus Whitman Hotel is a landmark in Walla Walla. It's the building you see over the city as you drive in. This iconic hotel opened in 1928 and hosts several tasting rooms on site as well as a restaurant. If you are looking for something a bit more casual and kitschy, the Finch is for you. Within walking distance to downtown, this boutique hotel has great sitting areas outside, and the rooms are thoughtfully put together with everything you need and nothing you don't. Rooms are simple and unique, and the front desk staff is always ready with great local tips for enjoying your time in Walla Walla. There is more to see in Walla Walla. Stick with us on our next episode, where we visit Le Col number 41 and share a year's worth of pairings with their wines. We will learn more about wine pairing and a bit about wine blending. We've also added some extras on Caprio Cellars on our YouTube channel, so check those out. Thanks for joining us on The Scenic Route.